The River Conon lays deep in the heart of the highlands. Its waters arise from springs and peat bogs near the village of Achnasheen, and it flows down through the lands of Ross, where it is met by the Black Water, and eventually enters the North Sea at the firth of Cromarty. It is a powerful river that has sustained the local highlanders for hundreds of years, granting them both food and water. But as with all great rivers in Scotland, the dark depths of the Conon was said to be patrolled by a spirit or she, equal in power to the great force of the water. In this case, the long winding pathways of the river were protected by a magnificent kelpy or water horse, and it is this very creature we shall learn about today, the doomed rider. Many years ago, on the banks of the Conon River, near an old church, stood a great cornfield, which was said to grow with greater speed and greater bounty than all the other fields in Scotland. This was due to the strength and the power of both the river and the spirit within. On one day, there was a group of Highland farmers toiling away in the field, harvesting that year's crop. It was near midday, and the sun shone bright in the sky, when the weary men heard a great booming call from the direction of the river. "The hour has come, but not the man." Wheeling around, the men glared in awe of the great beast that had appeared upon the false ford within the river. An immense, jet-black horse, larger than even the most powerful of Scottish Clydesdales, now stood between two deep black pools which lay on either side of the ford. The men had all heard tales of this dreaded kelpy, and were instantly petrified at the horror before them. The great equine head of the kelpy turned towards the men, its demonic stare burrowing deep within their minds. Once more it called, "The hour has come, but not the man." Then in a blinding flash, the gargantuan shape of the beast seemed to melt from existence, leaving only a powerful trail through the water. As the men slowly returned from the stiffness of terror, they wondered at the words of the kelpy. Was it a threat or a warning? Their village and families had always endeavoured to show respect to the Great Spirit, and offerings were always given to the river in the hope that neither them nor their loved ones would experience the wrath of the kelpy. Somewhat worried and also quite wearied from their day's work, the men began to return home, whereupon they spotted a man in the distance, riding a horse at a ferocious speed, heading straight for them and the river ford. All at once, the men now understood the kelpy's words. This was the man, and the hour was not yet up. They called to the man and told him to turn back, as the way forward was not safe for him. But the rider paid no attention and continued upon his path. It was then that the four strongest Highlanders leapt in front of the rider and stopped his horse. They begged him to take another road, for if he did not, his life was surely forfeit. The rider paid no heed to these wild superstitions, and said he carried important information and must pass the ford immediately. The Highlanders were determined to save the man's life, whether he wanted them to or not. The men roughly pulled the rider from his mount and cajoled him into the old church house, which they quickly barred for the man's own safety. The rider screamed and banged upon the door for some time, but the farmers would not budge until the man was no longer in danger. When the fatal hour of the kelpy had finally passed, the men unbarred the church and flew wide the doors, calling to the man that he was free and could continue his journey. But there was no reply. Once more they called, and once more only silence returned. The confused men entered the old church, and to their horror found the rider laying stiff upon the floor, his face resting in the water of an old stone trough, and I am sure you know full well which river fed that very trough. The kelpy had taken his prey, and the hour and the man had finally met. Thank you for listening, and a special thank you to my wonderful patrons who help keep these tales alive. The Doomed Rider is a short but somewhat classic tale of a Scottish kelpy, and at one time it was very well known through most of the Highlands. Unfortunately, the days of remembering these stories seem to have passed us by. This tale seems to use a very common folklore trope, known as the hour has come but the man has not, which has a strong connection to British waterways and water spirits, and can be found in a handful of other Scottish kelpy tales, as well as in many folk stories from England and Wales, like the Welsh tale known as the Man of the Green Wood. But it is not only found in Britain, as stories of these ilk seem to be quite prevalent on the continent as well, such as the German-told story The Water Will Have Its Sacrifice, and it appears in many of the Danish tales of the Knock or water troll. I wonder if there is some ancient connection between these stories and the spirits that they describe. Or is it perhaps that rivers, lochs and lakes have always been of great importance to ancient cultures and peoples? The great kelpy of the Conon appears in many other Scottish tales, one of which that I am particularly fond of involves an expert swimmer who would spend many hours swimming in the river and pools all down the Conon, never fearing the spirits or what he believed were old wives' tales of the kelpy. But then on one afternoon, while he was resting in a pool, he saw a traveller in the distance trying to ford the river. When the travelling man arrived at the ford, he was met by a young, beautiful woman clad in a luscious green robe. She beckoned to the man and asked his aid in crossing the water. With much politeness, the man took the woman's hand and began to lead her across the ford. But when the pair reached the halfway point, the woman's alluring face changed into the devouring maw of a sinister beast. Her fang-like teeth sank deep into the traveller's throat, and before the man had time to scream, he was pulled beneath the water by the immense force of the kelpy. The traveller would never return from his watery doom, but the horrified swimmer would leap from the pool and run home as if the very beast of the Conon was at his heels. And it is quite safe to say that that man no longer swam in the dangerous river. The Conon River, and the strength that is contained within its water, now powers Scotland itself, as there is a series of hydroelectric dams which now stretch the entire length of the river, providing much of the county's electricity. It is as if we are now harnessing the very power of the ancient kelpies, and perhaps it is their gift to modern Scotland. On the other hand, a sleeping spectral beast could one day awake and find that we have entered its domain without permission, bringing upon ourselves the one thing that all those of Scottish blood fear, the wrath of the kelpy. Slán Dubha.